Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Joseph Ho in Whitehorse. Over the summer, much of Canada saw an increase in cases of COVID-19, and that included the Northwest Territories. From late August to mid-September, 5 people were hospitalized in the territory. Most of them were 65 and older. Dr. Cami Candola is the territory's chief public health officer. She was interviewed on CBC Radio this morning, and she explains how this increase aligns with a spike in other respiratory infections.
So when we look at respiratory infections, we're in an endemic phase. We're not in a pandemic. And so what we see is we see respiratory infections occur at different stages, but it's not overwhelming the healthcare system. And if you look at the level of infections and the level of severity, the variants still remain mild, but you will see that there was a significant increase in August and a decrease and then another peak in September. So what's mainly circulating is COVID-19, but we do anticipate we enter late fall, that we'll start to see an increase in influenza and RSV like we did last year.
Candola says the health authorities will likely start offering vaccines to residents at high risk. She expects COVID and flu vaccines to be more widely available by November. We will have more from this morning's interview from the Trailbreaker later on in the show. In Yellowknife, a city committee presented council with proposed changes to the zoning bylaw today. City staff hope the changes will lead to more housing. The revised bylaw would add 2 new zones. They could be used for classifying new buildings and rules for their use. Charles E. White is the city's Director of Planning and Development. She says the zones will help fill what she describes as the missing middle, housing that falls between apartment buildings and single-family homes.
People who are, like I said, currently in a rental market and looking to move up through the spectrum. And we've really not been building much of this since about the late 90s.
More discussion about the proposed changes is expected in the coming weeks. In Nunavut, a legislative committee has finished 3 days of televised hearings. TJ Deere tells us what the members covered.
Members of the Nunavut Legislative Assembly gathered in Iqaluit for televised hearings of the Standing Committee on Oversight of Government Operations and Public Accounts. A big topic was contaminated sites. Iqaluit-Sina MLA Janet Pitsulak-Brewster was the first to bring it up.
I'm really curious about how Inuit Kalyamayatukangit is brought into the discussion about contaminated sites through this working group.
It was soon revealed that the group that deals with the sites has no Inuk in it, but they are willing to include someone. It was also revealed that the government was in a surplus of $167.3 million during the 2022-23 fiscal year, but Iqaluit Manarayak MLA Adam Ahiak Lightstone says that could be a bad thing.
I believe that the government of Nunavut's surpluses are mainly contributed to 2 major factors. One being delays in capital projects, and 2, unspent O&M program funding.
The annual reports of the Office of the Languages Commissioner of Nunavut were also discussed. Commissioner Carlin Ahiak says more than 3,000 fewer people spoke Inuktitut between the 2016 and 2021 censuses.
The decrease is alarming for Inuktitut speakers. We have to consider it a valuable language, as well as Inuinnaqtut.
Tununik MLA Karen Nutahak says people making fun of people with different dialects and others trying to learn the language could be a reason why people stop speaking it.
If we want the Inuktitut language to be strong, to be used properly, we have to make sure that we don't make fun of people and who don't use it properly.
The committee will now process the information and present a report to the government of Nunavut in the upcoming fall sitting. TJ Deere, CBC News, Iqaluit.
A traditional camp on the Peel River taught youth about harvesting moose. About 40 people from Fort McPherson took part in the camp last week. Des Lorraine tells us what they learned.
The camp was 3 hours up the Peel River from Fort McPherson. 15 youth were there to learn traditional skills and hear stories about a life long ago.
This area is really important to us all in protection. With this area, it's we always talk about protecting the peel, and we wanted these kids to see the area where we talk about why we want to protect it. It is so pristine area. The water is so clear up there, and it's just a country that we want to protect, and we wanted to get them to see that.
During their downtime, the group would perform songs for each other.
We had 3 or 4 of the young boys that play fiddle and guitar, and we took that up. And just amazing at night, when the sun goes down, you're sitting beside the fire, and these boys play their fiddle. It's just amazing. Everybody is just happy.
Kay says the camp was funded by various organizations in the community. The meat was distributed on Friday to residents in Fort McPherson. Des Loreen, CBC News, Inuvik.
Students in Whitehorse got a hands-on lesson about the fashion industry. Grade 10 fashion students at Porter Creek Secondary set up at the Sports Expert store downtown today. It was the public's first chance to see their Orange Shirt Day designs. Students have been working for weeks, selling the shirts they helped create. The fashion program teaches students about the business. They learn about inventory, pricing, tagging, and how to display merchandise. The experience gave this Tall-Tan student a chance to honor his heritage and to mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
I had a great experience making these designs. It was a way of going back to my cultural background and paying thanks and being thankful for them.
This is the 4th year the program has designed and sold shirts. Sales have increased every year. Proceeds will go to the Committee on Abuse in Residential Schools Society. A new art studio in the Yukon is bursting with vibrancy. It's a creative space for people with developmental disabilities. 3 of its artists have recently had their work shortlisted for the territory's permanent art collection. Cheryl Kawaja takes us behind the scenes.
They call this space the Warehouse. It's part of a new art program run by Tagatha Auger, a Whitehorse-based nonprofit that does inclusive day programming. The Warehouse is giving artists like Ernest Chua, who is nonverbal, time, space, and material to develop as artists. The art coming out of this program is being called original, complex, and unique.
In some ways, a lot of times, people with disabilities are just given crafts or sort of, projects to make that aren't really individualized. But in this program, and at Tagatha Auger, we really have a person-centered approach. And so each artist is making work that is completely different from the other.
It's really fun to draw, and I like doing art. It's pretty nice because it's quiet and stuff. That makes me happy. So.
This is very good art. This is very well thought through, complex art. It's not art made by children, it's art made by adults who've had a whole life experience and are bringing that into their practice.
The artists in this program are making names for themselves in the broader arts community. Teresa Roberts' work is currently featured in this show with another Yukon artist.
Their art is together, and I think that there is no difference when you're looking at that art. You don't know who has a disability and who doesn't, and I think that that is a way that art can really remove all of those barriers and that stigma that is inherent in our society and our culture. It kind of dissipates immediately when you look at the art.
One of Chua's works is among the latest acquisitions to the Yukon Permanent Art Collection.
Ernest is incredibly prolific, and his work has so much feeling to it. I think what is really interesting and impactful about Ernest's work is that he really has this intuitive flow, and he changes his color palette, he changes the kind of references he's using, and he doesn't tell us the whole story. Sometimes we have a statement beside a work of art that tell us exactly what we're seeing, and with Ernest's work, we need to spend time and explore it and come to our own conclusions.
We're getting kind of a glimpse into his mind, and maybe getting even just a tiny glimpse of maybe the kinds of things Ernest is thinking about.
New plans are already in the works. A solo show, a collective exhibition, and guest artists dropping in for workshops and to create alongside these artists. There is undoubtedly much more to come. Cheryl Kawaja, CBC News, Whitehorse.
Hollywood is confronting beauty standards in a trio of new films. The movies tackle aging and body image, and they challenge unrealistic expectations placed on women. Magda Ghebreselassie has more on the message the movies hope to send.
Younger, more beautiful, more perfect.
Hollywood's obsession with youth and beauty is the message we're all familiar with. But this year at TIFF, several movies took aim at the limitations society places on women.
You can't escape from yourself.
In The Substance, Demi Moore plays a fitness celebrity told she's too old to keep her show. Injecting herself with a solution to release a younger version of herself opens herself up to grave consequences.
I think the body horror, to me, is the perfect way to express the violence that, this pressure puts on us, and the violence that, in the end, we do to ourselves to kind of try and fit the absurd standard of perfection.
That sense of violence shines through in Shell 2. Starring Kate Hudson and Elizabeth Moss, it's another body horror exploring the pressure to press pause on the aging process.
This is obviously something people talk about all the time. What is it to age? What is it to feel like you're not relevant?
Relevance is a key theme of The Last Showgirl. Co-star Jamie Lee Curtis says,
"What I'm happy is that we're talking about this cosmeceutical industrial complex, which is feeding all of us every day through advertising, that we are not enough." Yeah. That's being explored in all these different art forms.
We get old. We age.
Tracy Moore is also thrilled these themes are being explored.
And I know a lot of actresses who feel this way. When they get to a certain age, they have to start thinking about fillers and facelifts and Botox because they feel the pressure of Hollywood.
Let's go. Proving these films are just more examples of art imitating life. Magda Ghebreselassie, CBC News, Toronto.
He was completely unaccountable.
Prince Andrew never had somebody say the word no.
The Queen adored him more than anybody else.
This whole story is about the abuse of power.
We've got emails, we've got photographs, we've got witnesses.
Wow. Ordinary people turn a small investment into big bucks.
I'm in it to win it.
Do you think Mummy and Daddy are going to double their money? That's what I thought.
Why, hello.
You want it? I got it.
This is so cool.
Focus, focus, focus.
Here we go.
Oh, imagine how good the TV's gonna look now.
Good God!
This is incredible.
Did you know this?
As if.
Could the pressure be any higher?
Every week, the issues that matter to Canadians.
Cost of living hurts everybody.
Connecting politics to people.
Win, win, win.
We are not going back.
Sundays, join me for Rosemary Barton Live.
It makes sense that they get a larger share, or does it?
Welcome to the Greenbelt.
All of this, just single detached homes.
Yes.
What do we know? I think we can explain.
About that with Andrew Chang. Watch free on CBC Gem.
It's got to come from the heart.
I will cry. You're so together.
How much more connected do you want to be? See you there.
Guess what? Pinch me. Ooh. Yes.
An Invictus Games competitor says he's out thousands of dollars for injuries he sustained while representing Canada. The Games are an international competition for wounded, injured, and sick military veterans. As Peter Zimonets reports, critics say the case highlights the need for all participants to have medical insurance.
Yeah, grab my crutches, please.
Scott Snow spent 14 years in the Navy, retiring with multiple injuries, depression, and PTSD. While competing at the 2023 Invictus Games in Germany, he fell hard, injuring his head, neck, and shoulder.
Canada's Scott Snow takes a tumble out of his chair.
By the time he returned to Canada, he'd lost sensation in his hands and feet. Serving Canadian Forces members at the Invictus Games are medically insured, but veterans like Scott are not.
For the rest of their life, they're covered, any expenses, any modifications, and I have to rely on my credit card.
Snow and other veterans on the team in 2023 say they weren't fully briefed on what insurance they'd need to cover injuries sustained in competition.
It was just a passing point. We were never taken aside to explain.
Now, 2 spinal surgeries later, he's paid thousands in assisted living costs, but can't afford prescribed vision therapy. Soldier On, a Canadian Forces program, manages Canada's Invictus team with funding from Veterans Affairs Canada. Snow says he's asked Soldier On for help, but has yet to receive a callback.
I just assumed that when we got our own travel insurance, if something serious happened, that the team and organization would help.
They're not providing insurance to veterans is really just a most heinous, icing on a cake.
Veterans Affairs says it will work to resolve the problem before Canada opens the 2025 Games in Whistler, BC. Without committing to a timeline, National Defence said Soldier On will look at what additional coverage could be added to fill gaps for participants after the event. Snow says the Invictus Games was an inspiring experience, but Team Canada has left him feeling betrayed.
It was just fed to us that, we're a team, we're here for you forever. And then just to leave, it tore like a piece of my heart that I don't know if it'll ever.
Peter Zimonets, CBC News, Kingston, Ontario.
Emergency lines in 13 Nunavut communities will be down this Wednesday. It's because of network upgrades. Between 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. Eastern, 1111 will not be available in these communities. RCMPs say other communities could also be affected. Whale Cove's temporary grocery store is now in business. Stanley Adyuk is the chair of the Isatek Co-op. He says staff have been working nonstop after their only community store burned to the ground in August. Adyuk says people are happy to see more products returning to shelves.
The co-op is now a beautiful sight to see, because now we can see our daily needs stocked on shelves. And up to today, we're still receiving a lot of donations, so earlier this weekend they arrived and will be available for all the households.
The temporary store will also offer Canada Post services. Parks Canada is calling for greater awareness after 5 bison were killed last week in vehicle collisions in Alberta. The animals hold historical and cultural significance for Indigenous peoples, and their deaths have renewed questions about balancing tourism with conservation. Sam Sampson has the details.
Days later, and Sandra Alexander says she can feel something devastating happened here.
I see it. I feel the energy.
As a cultural educator, she helps others understand that bison have spiritual ties with First Nations. The animals were almost wiped out during colonization, so this loss cuts deep.
My prayers go out to those who were responsible for this, because I know that they're probably hurting, but we're all hurting here too.
Early Thursday morning, Parks Canada says 2 pickup trucks hit a herd of 5 bison. The trucks were totaled. No people were hurt, but 3 bison died instantly. 2 were euthanized on site. RCMP say fog may have contributed to the crashes here, and they've ruled out speeding and impairment. The drivers won't face criminal charges. Drivers have killed 11 bison in Elk Island since 2020. Staff have tried speed bumps and closing popular stargazing spots, but are now considering periodically closing the gates to the public.
Just recognizing just how valuable and beautiful this place is to so many visitors, and restricting that access is not something that we would take certainly lightly.
There's a national struggle to manage visitors. Banff National Park is putting together a plan to handle congestion at Lake Louise. Others have tried restricted parking, timed entry, and higher fees. But ecotourism researchers say it's time to understand visitors' motives and perhaps steer them away. Can they get the experience they want without visiting a protected park?
Managing the natural world is not that hard because the natural world tends to be pretty good at that on their own. Managing the human use side, much, much more difficult.
But that management is important. The bison at Elk Island are used to help populate the vulnerable species around North America. So a big part of this animal's future relies on protection here in Alberta. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Elk Island National Park.
The city of Calgary got an update today on the development of a residential school memorial. 5 Indigenous-led design teams have been chosen to put forward ideas. The memorial would be located where the Bow and Elbow rivers meet. Scott Dipple reports.
The Indian Residential School Memorial will be at the site of the Confluence Historic Park and be a place for community gatherings and education on reconciliation. Mayor Jyoti Gondek says she's looking forward to seeing design ideas.
Right now, we don't know what's going to happen there, so the size is a good thing in the sense that it can accommodate many different things. So once again, we don't have all of the answers yet, and when we do, we'll make some important decisions.
An Indigenous elder and residential school survivor who spoke to council today, Marina Crane, says the memorial will be for everyone because all people suffer from trauma.
And if people don't see that Indigenous people have a way of knowing and that our parallels are there to help, not just ourselves, but people in general, we have more in common as human beings than just this past history.
The designs will be circulated next year with the selection of a winning bid by next June. Construction will start a few months after that. Scott Dipple, CBC News at Calgary City Hall.
As we mentioned earlier in the show, COVID-19 cases are on the rise in the Northwest Territories. 54 cases were reported between June and August. That's 4 times higher than the same period last year. Dr. Cami Candola is the Territory's Chief Public Health Officer. She spoke to Hillary Bird on CBC's Trailbreaker this morning. Here is parts of that interview.
What I look at is the respiratory season, and COVID infections tend to occur in the summer, and when school starts, we start to see an increase. And that's what we saw last year was in the summer and into September, we saw an increase in COVID. And then it stabilized, and then we saw other respiratory infections such as influenza and RSV. So if we look at our last season, 2023 to 2024, the numbers that we can look, the hard outcomes we can look at is measures of severity like hospitalizations. In our last respiratory season for influenza, we had about 74 hospitalizations, and a third of them were in people 65 and older. For RSV, we had 74 hospitalizations, and 80% were under 5. And for COVID for last season, we had about 44 hospitalizations, but 50% were in 65 and older. We are now starting our 2024-25 season, and our increase right now, what we're seeing is COVID infections. So far in this season, which we count from late August to mid-September, we've had 5 hospitalizations, of which the majority are 65 and older.
What is the plan for vaccinations this year?
There is a new vaccine, one that's been recently approved for Moderna, and Pfizer is pending approval. Novavax did get approval, but it's for the KP2 variant. The KP2 variant is a sublineage of the JN.1 lineage, which is under the Omicron variant. The most common circulating variant is KP3, but KP2 and KP3 are like sisters. So we have that vaccine coming out likely in October.
When is that expected to roll out here in the Northwest Territories?
So
you mentioned that Moderna has approval and Pfizer is just waiting. So when are we expected to get those doses?
So we're waiting for the health authorities to roll out their fall program. We anticipate the vaccine should arrive here in October. So what I can tell the public is stay alert on the websites for your health authority and they'll let you know where and when they'll plan their clinics.
But who should be getting a vaccine at this point?
For sure, there are people at high risk for viral-related complications. So for the influenza and COVID, we know our elders are at high risk. We've seen a lot of hospitalizations, 65 and older, people with chronic illness, pregnant women, children under 5, especially for influenza-related complications. What parents don't know is they think it's the flu vaccines mainly for elderly people, but we've had severe complications in our under 5. And the RSV monoclonal antibody is focused on babies, unfortunately, but there are adult RSV vaccines out there, but it is you have to pay for the vaccine. It's not publicly funded.
But what about for the general public when it comes to the COVID vaccine? What is the guidance there?
The guidance is you may get the vaccine, but the high-risk population, definitely it's strongly recommended. The good thing is when people are going to get their vaccines, they can have that one-on-one discussion with the nurses providing the vaccine. So if they have questions, they can talk to her and see if the vaccine's right for them or if they need the vaccine. But the 2 vaccines that will be available are the flu vaccine, the COVID vaccine, and for infants, the monoclonal antibody, nirsevimab.
Do you recommend the general public, not part of those groups, those high-risk groups, get the updated COVID vaccine?
So we'll follow the NACI recommendations, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, and the advice is those are at increased risk for COVID vaccines. It's a strong recommendation. But for those who are not at risk, it's May. And so that's where people should have an informed discussion with their nurse when they are going up to receive their vaccines.
And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, head to cbc.ca/north. I'm Joseph Ho. Thank you for watching. Good night from Whitehorse.
We carry a world of information in our pockets because we want to know. Breaking news that shapes your world.
All right.
Reporting from the scene onto your screens.
Dropping the 8 now. We are just approaching Gaza.
With local CBC Radio 1 Live to connect us closer to home. It's news you can trust, delivered when you want, where you want. On the CBC News app. Download for free.
Oh, imagine how good the TV is gonna look now.
And spoiler alert.
No! Don't panic.
Don't panic.
Cut to.
Well, we're not cutting to.
What do ladies want to watch?
Look out! It's drama.
I'm ready for it.